you received a notice from the Social Security Administration stating that you have been overpaid, you may not have to pay it back. Social Security regulations allow the local Social Security office to waive the overpayment if the situation meets several criteria. In order to get your Social Security waived, it must meet one of the following circumstances. First, it isn't your fault. In order to meet this criteria, you must be able to prove that it is entirely the fault of the Social Security Administration. The second criteria is if you cannot afford to pay back the amount of the overpayment. If you're on supplemental security income, this will usually prove that you cannot pay it back. If you aren't on supplemental security income, then you will need to fill out a financial statement and provide document proving you cannot pay back the amount of the overpayment. In some situations, it may be considered unfair to force you to pay back the overpayment even if you have the money, such as having the money but relying on it to pay for major medical costs. These situations are evaluated on a case-by-case basis. If you meet one of these requirements, then an administrative law judge may be able to waive your overpayment. You should start by filling out a request for waiver of overpayment form. Look for a link to this form on this page. Let's talk about how an overpayment occurs. The amount of your benefits is determined by a variety of factors, and any changes and miscalculations in those factors could cause an overpayment. There are several common situations that could cause an overpayment. If you're on Social Security Disability Insurance or SSDI, you're entitled to an amount based on what you paid into your Social Security during your working life. Sometimes that amount might be reduced for payments of child support, Medicare premiums, student loans, or to cover a past overpayment. It is rare that Social Security incorrectly calculates the amount of your SSDI check. However, if you began working and Social Security determines that you're medically improved or that you otherwise didn't qualify because you made money, they may notify you that the months you received payments were overpayment. If you have Social Security insurance, you are entitled to a specific amount of benefits that may be reduced by child support, student loans, or other circumstances including income or in-kind support. For example, if you live with a family member and do not pay market value rent, Social Security may reduce your payment. If you are getting help from a family member and Social Security doesn't know, or if you are earning money and Social Security is not keeping track of the earnings, you could have an overpayment. Another reason for an overpayment is if they think you had more than $2,000 in assets or $3,000 for a couple during any specific month. If you've had a savings account and it went over $2,000 in 3 months, you may be asked to repay. When Social Security is determining if you received an overpayment, they can go back as far as when you started receiving Social Security.
If you are asking to have your overpayment waived, the Social Security Administration will want to know what caused you to receive the overpayment. If you have a payee, someone who receives your benefits for you, that person may be responsible if they didn't report a change in your circumstances. You will have the opportunity to explain this on the request for waiver form that you will fill out. Here are some examples of situations you may have to explain. If you claim that you didn't know you had to report income, you will need to prove that. You weren't notified when you were approved for benefits. If you say that you didn't understand or weren't able to follow the directions, then you may be required to have a payee in the future to handle your benefit checks for you. If you did report your income, you will need to explain who you reported it to, and if you reported it by phone or mail. Give details such as dates, notes, phone logs, copies of what you mailed, and other credible information. This information may help prove that the overpayment was not your fault. If the Social Security Administration is saying that you have income you do not have, you might have been a victim of identity theft, so it is important to follow up. Social Security can tell you what to do if you have not earned any money, but there are earnings on your record. If Social Security Administration claims you were getting financial help from a friend or family member and you were not, you might need to prove this by showing how much rent you paid, especially if you rent from a family member. Sometimes an overpayment notice may be sent if the Social Security Administration believes you aren't disabled anymore because of your work or a medical improvement. If you are still disabled, you should explain that on your request for waiver form. If you are working and reporting income, you might also have an overpayment due to confusion or misapplication of work incentives. For example, if you are using an impairment-related work expenses program, you should explain that on your request for waiver form. There are many other situations that could cause an overpayment, such as having an income that changes from month to month, failure to report child support payments, or receiving irregular payments, or being institutionalized in a hospital or jail, which would mean you shouldn't have received benefits during that time. When claiming that the overpayment wasn't your fault on the request for waiver form, you will need to be very specific about what efforts you made to report your income, or that you didn't have control of your income, or that you were unable to report it. Include as much information as possible, such as copies of letters or emails, phone logs, notes you wrote, or anything else that can help prove that it wasn't your fault. If you have an attendant, social worker, advocate, or someone else who knows about your situation, ask them to write a letter saying what they know. The next step will be showing that you cannot afford to pay the overpayment back. Even if they determine it was not your fault, they will still require repayment if they believe you can afford to pay it back. If you have SSI, they will never require you to pay more than 10% of your check per month, but there is no limit if you are on SSDI. To prove you cannot afford to pay it back, the request for waiver form asks you to fill out information about your expenses and assets. If you have SSI, you will be able to skip this part of the form. If you don't have SSI and need to fill out the financial information on the form, be honest and accurate as possible, and remember you will need to prove expenses with receipts. When you have the packet of information together, make a copy for yourself. You can either take the packet of information along with the request for waiver form to Social Security and get a receipt, or send it certified mail, return receipt requested, so you can prove when it was sent. There is no deadline on requesting a waiver for an overpayment, but you should start the form as soon as possible so that you will have time to collect proof of expenses, bank statements, or other information that helps prove your case. If you have upcoming medical expenses that you need to pay for, you can get a letter from your doctor saying when you will need the money and how much will be required. Have your doctor include that the items or procedures stated in the letter are required for your health. Once you submit the waiver request, you will likely be called into a meeting with the Social Security office. In preparation for this meeting, you may want to ask to see your file so that you can better understand what the Social Security office knows about your case. Your file will have everything that you sent in or signed regarding your benefits. If you cannot get out of the overpayment, or if the overpayment is your fault, you should ask to enter into a payment plan where they withhold a specific amount of your check each month. If you have SSI, it will usually be 10%. If you have SSDI, the amount will be based on your income and expenses. You can also request to argue your case in front of an administrative law judge at an administrative hearing. Look for information about administrative hearings on this page.